join me in welcoming Oliver Double.
Hello. How's it going? Excellent. Do you know what? When I was a stand-up comedian, I always dreamt of playing to an American audience because I've seen footage of American stand-up gigs, and it's amazing because the comedian comes out, they go, yeah, 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 yeah. In Britain, you come out and they go, yes, well done. So I thought I'll go off, come back on, and you can give me one of them American-style welcomes. Okay, cool, let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from the UK, it's Oliver Double. Oh, no, I'm embarrassed. Hello, great. Now, this is a show I like to call Diabetes-Related Hilarity. This is going to be the least educational show you're going to see in the whole of this event. That was a morning well spent on PowerPoint. Look at that wobbling head. That was a morning of my life right there. Now, yes, it's a show. I'm not actually type 1 myself. As Richard explained, I'm not type 1. I'm just a civilian. But I have got diabetes in the family. This is my family here. Oh, hold on. There we go. It's my family there. And that's my wife, Jackie, and my 2 sons, Joe and Tom. I'll tell you a bit more about them. This is Joe. He's 14. He's off with the teens at the moment, and he was diagnosed back in 2005 at the age of 8. And his younger brother has had diabetes much longer. He was diagnosed before he was even 2 years old, back in 2000. But as you can see, he's not bothered about it. Look at this. He's a happy chap, right? Now, the thing about Joe and Tom that you need to know is they really, diabetes is a pain, right? But, having 2 kids who've got spirit really helps. Now, this is a story that happened way long ago, because Tom's 12 now, and he's had diabetes for 10 years. But this is a story that happened when they looked more like this. So Tom was, I think, about 3 years old. He'd had diabetes for a year or so, and Joe hadn't got diabetes yet. And what happened was, do you get this? Whenever there's a story in the news about unhealthy living, right? People being overweight, eating too much, not exercising, they always link in diabetes. Do you get this? Does it make you sick? Because it sort of never makes the distinction between type 1 and type 2, and it makes out that if you've got kids with diabetes, you sort of brought that on them. Really annoying. But on this occasion, I felt cheered, because the radio was coming out with one of these news stories, and it was going blah, 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 overweight, not enough exercise, blah, 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 diabetes. And hearing the word diabetes, Tom went, diabetes? Hooray! And Joe turned to him and said, diabetes? Wow, Tom's famous. We could all do with a bit of that spirit, right? So anyway, I'm not just going to tell you about them. I'm also going to tell you about you, because what I've been doing is I've been doing a survey on the CWD list in the UK and in America, right? And I've asked 4 questions, 4 burning, vital questions about diabetes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you, first of all, the British answers to each question, and then the American answers. Now, the first question I asked was, what's the most annoying thing about diabetes? And I think some of these you'll recognise, maybe you could clap the ones you recognise. What's the most annoying thing about diabetes? Having needles stuck in you. Feeling shaky and having to stop what you're doing to do a blood test. Having it every day forever and ever. The chronic sleep deprivation. Can you relate to that? Yeah. Some of you too tired even to put your hand up, right? We do that nighttime testing thing. I think that relates to my next answer to this question. What's the most annoying thing about diabetes? Being woken up by the paramedics when you went to bed without pajamas. Brackets, will never do that again. Actually, the thing about nighttime testing that gets me is I don't know if you have these things, but Joe and Tom have these things called diabetes wipes. You wipe the finger down, and you wipe the finger, and it stops it being sticky for when you do a blood glucose test on the finger. And so what happens if you're doing that in the day, you wipe their finger, and what they do very helpfully is they pull the rest of the fingers back so that you don't forget which finger you wiped and stab the wrong finger, right? But the thing about it that's really touching, when we do nighttime testing, you go in, and you take their hand out, you wipe the finger, and even though they are fast asleep, even then their fingers curl back. And you see the fingers curl back and you think, that is so kind, that is so cooperative, but then you realise You realise the gesture they're forming and you think, I hope that's directed at diabetes and not at me. I think I touched a nerve with this question with our next respondent. What's the most annoying thing about diabetes? Check this out for anger. Oh, that's easy. That would be the bloody clinic with the idiot staff who smile at you with an air of evangelical verve and pitying condescension at the same time. Makes me want to find an outsized syringe full of insulin and stick it in the forehead between their eyebrows. Quite scary. That was the British answers. The first American answer I got, I thought, wow, America's got to be the best country in the world. These people are so cheerful and can-do and upbeat. The first answer I got from the American CWD list to the question, what's the most annoying thing about diabetes, was, hi, Oliver, nice to meet you. And then they've done a little smiley face icon. So it kind of went, hi, Oliver, nice to meet you. And then he said this is brilliant. As sucky as diabetes is, sucky. What a word! We have found strange and funny things over the years. And I went, that is brilliant. America, you're brilliant. You're so upbeat. You are so positive. The next one I read said simply, is there anything that is not annoying? What about this one then? What's the most annoying thing about diabetes? The continuous blood glucose monitor buzzing a lot. Do you get annoyed by that? Joe and Tom, often they get so annoyed by it, they ignore it. And that's annoying because they should attend to it when it's buzzing. And I thought of a really good idea to make it less annoying and to make it more of a positive inducement for a child to do a blood glucose test when it's needed. Instead of making that little burp, 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 burp noise, they should give the thing the voice of Yoda, right? Because imagine how effective that would be if they needed to update the pump and it went, test your blood sugar, you must. Keep within range and a powerful Jedi you will be. I think you find they do their blood glucose tests. Okay, now this next one. This was the best response I had to any of the questions. It was amazing, right? This from the American CWD list, and I hope this person's here today because this person is a genius. And when I read it, I thought that's not an American person. That's a 19th century English novelist. Because check this out. What's the most annoying thing about diabetes? The fact that influencing our sugars, let alone controlling them, is more art than science. And art is a fickle mistress. Yeah. I was so pleased when I got that. And what made me even more pleased, and this is honestly true, that was sent to me by somebody who glories in the name Scott Strange. What? Is he here? It's Scott. Scott, you are a genius, my friend. Yes. Take your bow. Take your bow. Right, now, the saddest response I had in response to what's the most annoying thing about diabetes, the saddest response I had was being different. And I'll tell you why I find that sad, is because it's not your diabetes that makes you different. Yeah, it does make you a bit different, but the thing that makes you different is the fact you're you, right? That you're unique. I mean, Joe and Tom are different. They're really different. But they're different because they're special people, right? I've been writing down the stuff they say in these little books since Joe was about 2 or 3 years old. And I thought I'd share a few of the things that they've said over the years that I think is what makes them different, right? So Joe, he's the one who's 14, right? But this happened when he was 7, and he'd become a vegetarian, right? And I asked him why he wanted to be a vegetarian. And he said, this was his reasoning, at the age of 7 years old, right? He said, how would you like it if a cow tried to eat you? It's cruel to eat animals for food. We shouldn't kill animals. Well, we might have to kill a few so they don't take over. He's always been a sensitive little chap, right? He's always been like incredibly beyond his years in terms of empathy and sensitivity. So this was when he was 9 years old. We were watching the science fiction program Doctor Who. Time travel. They've got, yeah, right, so Doctor Who fans in the house, right. So it was the one with Queen Victoria. They went back to meet Queen Victoria, but they also met a werewolf, right? And it was terrifying, and Joe was only 9. And he sat through the whole program rigid with fear, absolutely terrified of this werewolf. And then at the end, the program finished and he turned to me and said, "Poor werewolf. He must be so misunderstood." Now, talking of werewolves, I don't know if we've got anybody here of a nervous disposition, but I'm just going to show you some art that Joe did about this time when he was about 9 years old, and it was a Halloween picture of a werewolf. And seriously, if there are any small children, this is very disturbing. You might want to just turn their faces away. This is the picture that Joe did of a werewolf. Here it goes. Just brace yourselves. Okay, there we go. Now don't worry, it can't hurt you. This werewolf can't hurt you because if you notice here, there's a little silver bullet in his back paw, right? And you can tell he's been badly injured because he's saying, "Ow." What you can't quite see on here, but it's a brilliant detail if you can see it close up, is that you can really tell that this werewolf has been harmed because from this bullet here, there's a very faint line going up, which is the poison from the silver bullet that goes right up here to the werewolf's heart. And the werewolf's heart is saying, "Oh, great." Right, the last thing from Joe's book, and then I'll move on to Tom. Now, this was when Joe was 10 years old. You've got to bear in mind, he's only 10 when this happened, and he was part of a lovely little group of friends. But there's one little boy called Matthew, and he was often picked on by one of the other friends called Josh. And Joe got so upset by this because he's so full of empathy, and he got so upset on Matthew's behalf. So I asked him, I said, "Why do you think it is that Josh picks on Matthew?" And Joe said, "I think it's because Matthew has potential." And Josh wants him to think that he hasn't, so that he can sit comfortably on his throne of lies. Yeah. Tom, right, is a very different kind of boy. They're very close to each other, actually, very, very close indeed. But Tom is more the kind of kid who's got a very left field imagination, and he'll say whatever he's thinking, regardless of the consequences, right? So we have a thing called, well, we call it Sweetie Day, you call it Candy Day. We have one day of the week which is sacred, where they have to have candy just like any other kid, and it's normally a Saturday, and it's a really happy time because they get to have candy, right? And one day in June 2004, so Tom was 5 years old, we're walking back from just getting the candy, and he'd just eaten the candy, so he was very happy, and it was a summer's day, and the town where we live is a coastal town, so it's a beautiful town in the summer, and we were walking along hand in hand, he just had this candy, he's very happy, he was holding my hand, and he whispered to me, "Shall I tell you a secret?" And I said, "Yes," and he said, "I love Mum more than you." Now, there's a thing about Tom that his left field bizarre imagination features prominently in his schoolwork, right? And I just wonder what his teachers think sometimes. When he was, this would have been not long after, he's about 6 years old, right? And they did a project on the Easter story. So all these kids had done these beautiful pictures of Jesus, right? And they'd done the captions underneath. And of course, being 6, they were spelt very bizarrely. So some of these pictures said things like Jesus died on the cross, right? Tom's spelt perfectly, but with an incredibly bizarre take on the traditional Easter story. Tom simply read, "Jesus had a meal of bread and wine. Yummy!" And about 6 months later, right? About 6 months later, they did this thing, the A to Z of the First World War, the alphabet of the First World War. They each had a letter of the alphabet, and they had to think of something to do with the First World War that began with that letter and draw a picture of it, and it went on a wall display. Tom got M, and he did M for medal. So he'd done this beautiful drawing of a medal, and he'd written on it the inscription that he thought medals would have, and it said, "For not being dead." That's Tom. So yeah, being different is not something you should worry about, right? Okay, the next question I asked is, have you ever cunningly used diabetes to your advantage? Well, here's where you can get some tips, people, right? I found the grown-ups were cunning. Like, for example, Emily, age 6, reported this of her mother. "Mummy has used my bedtime injection as an excuse to get us all out of going to Grandad's retirement party." The diabetic children are the real masters of this technique. Check some of these out. What, have you ever cunningly used diabetes to your advantage? Said the reason late for school was due to a hypo brackets when not really. Isabel has used diabetes to her advantage by scrolling back on her meter to find the last hypo reading, showing it to a teacher and getting to the front of the lunch queue. This is similar but even more hardcore. Selling lunch pass for £1 a time until caught. And finally, Lizzie, age 12, whole class had a lunchtime detention with a grumpy substitute teacher, and I said I had to do a blood test and have lunch due to my diabetes. Teacher looked a bit scared and said, yes, just go and take a friend. It was so cool. Now, bearing that in mind, you have to question the sanity of Joe's school because what they did, they issued him with this card. Of their own suggestion, they issued him with this card. You probably can't see that from where you're sitting, so this is what it looks like. It says simply, what I am doing is necessary for my diabetes. After I've finished, feel free to ask me what I've done. It's like a get out of jail free card. This is a Willy Wonka golden ticket, right? I've got this image of Joe in the school lunch hall, right, with a massive vat of fries in front of him, and he sticks his face in and starts eating. And the teacher comes up to him and says, Joe Double, what on earth do you think you're doing? And he goes, please don't discriminate against me because of my disability. Right. Now, the American responses to the question, have you ever cunningly used diabetes to your advantage, were subtly different. And I think they sort of show perhaps there's a more litigious culture in America where people are more afraid of lawsuits and things, because the first one I read simply said, no comment. And the second one sort of said the same thing, but slightly more artistically. It said, no, never, brackets, whistles nonchalantly. It's great they put a stage direction in there, so it's like, no, never. And what's amazing, that one was sent to me by Scott Strange. Yeah. The next question. Where's the weirdest place you've found a blood glucose testing strip? I bet you've all got one of those, right? Check some of these out. Every floor of every room in the house. In brother's diaper. In the hamster's food bowl. Stuck to the cat. In our homemade compost. In grandma's hair. There's some great American ones as well. This is beautiful, this one. In the ground after the winter's snow has melted away. Still there, completely unchanged. And this is Scott Strange's one. Wait for this, it's good, right? In a sandwich. That's going to be a super crunchy sandwich, isn't it? As a bookmark in my daughter's book. In dog poop while banging it up on a walk. And finally, in my panties. I guess I thought I was putting it in my pocket, but I guessed wrong. The final question I asked was, what's the stupidest thing anyone said to you about diabetes? And I bet some of you have had some of these. Like, you've told them you've got diabetes, and they turn to you and say, is it the serious type? Or will you grow out of it? I mean, it's sort of, trying to make out that it's some kind of childhood affectation that you'll eventually grow out of. What they're doing is mistaking diabetes for Pokemon, What's the stupidest thing that anybody said to you about diabetes? What if they say this? Have you had this where they say, my grandmother had diabetes and had to have her foot amputated, and that was after she went blind? Well, thanks for sharing. Along the same lines. Oh, I know all about diabetes. My cat had it. But we had her put down. Right, the American ones. This is an amazing one, right? When our daughter was checking her blood sugar, a waitress asked her what game she was playing. What game would you think that was? I was thinking maybe you thought it was like Thumb Wars Extreme. It's like regular Thumb Wars, but we draw blood! And you could adapt the traditional Thumb Wars rhyme. 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare a thumb war. 5, 6, 7, 8, time to check your blood sugar, mate. What about when somebody's told them that their child has diabetes and the person's turned around and says, oh, everyone has something. My daughter has a lisp. Yeah, that's exactly the same as diabetes, isn't it? Because if your daughter's got a lisp, presumably you have to wake up in the middle of the night and check her pronunciation. Right. What I like is when people have a smart answer to somebody who says something stupid, like this one. The principal of my son's school asked me how long do you think he will have the diabetes when I held a conference with her when my son was diagnosed. I was in shock and told her, I think only until next Tuesday. Now, talking of diagnosis, when Joe was diagnosed in 2005 at the age of 8, we caught it really, really early because Tom had been really ill, but we'd been living with diabetes by the time Joe was diagnosed, and so we caught it straight away. And what happened was he was cleaning his teeth, and Jackie and I both come to the conclusion that perhaps he had diabetes. So we tested him on Tom's blood glucose monitor and found he was off the scale high, right? So he's in the 600s at least, right? And so we took him to the emergency doctor in the hospital in the next town, and we had to get a friend over to come out and look after Tom because Tom was still only 6. And we had to drive off into the night, and they tested Joe and found out, sure enough, he had diabetes. And they told him, and he was so upset, as you can imagine. He knew what was ahead of him because he'd seen it happen to his brother. He was so upset, and he was so articulate. He came out with all those things about, I'll be different, I'll have to have it forever and ever, and all this. Some of the things he came out with were a bit weird. Like he said at one point, he said, I can't work out whether this is true or whether you're just saying it for a joke. What kind of parents will we be? But then he started to cheer up when we said, look, it'll give you something in common with Tom, and now Tom won't be the only one in the family with diabetes, and you can have this, deal with it together. And because they've always been close, that really cheered him up. And he said, yes, that's true, I'll be like Tom. We'll be the double diabetes brothers, right? And it was amazing. And then Jackie and Joe had to stay in hospital overnight, and I drove home, and our friend went home, and she put Tom to bed, and Tom was still awake. It was really late, and he was lying there rigid with fear. He was like this. And I said to him, Tom, do you know what's happened to Joe? And I said, well, they've done some tests and they found out, just like you, he's got diabetes. And he went, oh. And I said, is that what you thought? And he said, no. And I said, what did you think had happened to him? And he was absolutely serious. He said, I thought Joe was turning into a werewolf. And of course, if that had been true, the really frightening thing is Joe would then have looked like this. And he would have been terribly misunderstood. Now, just before we finish, I think Richard was talking about this a bit as well, but I really hate the advertising of blood glucose monitors because of the dishonesty. Like, look at this. Wouldn't life be amazing if every single different monitor you had, every time you did a BG, said 102? Wouldn't that be an amazing world? If they wanted to be honest about it, okay, sometimes they would say 93 in the commercial, but sometimes they might say 39. Sometimes they might say 252. And sometimes, if they're really being honest, they might say, is there anything that is not annoying? One of the things that isn't annoying is when you find a really good book about diabetes. I like this one. We mentioned Gary Shiner earlier. Do you know this one, Think Like a Pancreas? What a great book. And one of the things I like about this is the facts about diabetes history. Like, check this out. In 300 AD, Indian and Chinese scholars observed that the urine of people with diabetes was remarkably sweet. My question is, how did they find that out? You can't discover that by accident, can you? It'd be like, hey, this child is very, very ill. Can I taste his wee-wee? Remarkably sweet. And he goes on to say, for the next 1,200 years, diabetes was commonly diagnosed by water tasters who drank the urine of those suspected of having diabetes. What kind of a career choice is that? It's never going to be nice. Even if you come across a healthy patient, it would be like, you're healthy. I mean, but the thing that I like best about Think Like a Pancreas is I can't hear the title of that book, Think Like a Pancreas. I can't hear that phrase without thinking of the mid-1980s novelty hit by the Bangles, Walk Like an Egyptian. Because they kind of sound the same, right? Think like a pancreas, walk like an Egyptian. And what I'd like to do, if I may, is I'd like to finish off my little bit here with a song, my own cover version. Is that on? Yeah, great. My own version of Walk Like an Egyptian, but it's retitled Think Like a Pancreas. Check this out. And you're going to have to join in as well at a certain point. Okay, let's go. If your pancreas is knackered, you have to inject insulin and prick your finger, check your blood to see how much glucose it's got in. But it's very hard, it can be quite a fast. Balancing food and exercise, it's a pain in the pancreas. Blood sugars can go low, hypo, 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 hypo. Think like a pancreas. You might get an insulin pump if your blood sugar's chronic. It can give you more control, your pancreas is bionic. Less glucose highs, ooh, pump does what it ought to do. And soon your HbA1c is down towards 42. No injections, just press buttons, basal bolus, basal bolus. Think like a pancreas. Okay, I'm going to do the whistling bit in a minute. And I'd like you to all join in, because just think how amazing that's going to sound. Before I do, though, I'm going to do the solo. Now, I'm not going to say I'm going to rock this so hard I'm going to blow the roof off, right? What I am going to say is if you are of a nervous disposition, please brace yourselves. Everybody. One more time. And every time you have a meal, you have to put up with a fuss. Before you bolus or inject, you have to think like a pancreas. So what's to eat? Potato. Now you have to calculate the percentage and the amount. You have to count carbohydrate and multiply it by your ratio. Think like a pancreas. Join in. Think like a pancreas. Everybody, think like a pancreas. Think like a pancreas. Think like a pancreas. Thanks indeed. I'm Ollie Double. I'll see you later. Bye.